Experience!
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience presented by Underdog Fantasy. Use code Mayo at Underdog Fantasy right now. Get yourself a deposit bonus of up to $250. And if you want to make free projections completely customizable, put the onus on you. There's stock ones up there that you can adjust and tweak to make your own rankings. Create a free account at runthesims.com right now and get it all in you from theathletic.com. At Owen Kidd on X, Jake Ciely. What's going on, sir?
What's going on? Is football here? Depending on when you're watching this.
It's coming.
It's coming. No, I don't consider the Hall of Fame game football. That's why I was making the joke, because who are we going to get? Or who did we get, depending on when you're watching this? Nobody?
Yeah, nobody. And none of the starters are in. I mean, are we going to see many starters play in the preseason at all, do you think?
That's like, do we get to the point where it's like maybe one preseason game and that's it?
You probably need two just to get warmed up, to get everything settled, to get everyone reacclimated to actually playing football. But I assume that this is a phasing out of the preseason so they can add another game to the schedule at some point.
That would make sense. Yeah, drop it down to 2 and add an 18th week, and hopefully they add a second bye, although that would be a nightmare for us.
Yeah, that would not be a whole lot of fun. We get the football season well into April at that point. Don't think we want to be doing like 9 months of this stuff, but here we are. We're talking about the NFC or the AFC North. Sorry, if you've missed any of the division previews previous to this, hit the description. Go to Mayo Media Network on YouTube. You can find them all up there. Or if you prefer the audio versions, use Spotify, use Apple, and search the Pat Mayo Experience. They're all there right now. We'll start with the Cincinnati Bengals, who lost their offensive coordinator, but Zach Taylor calls the plays anyway, so it's not that big of a deal. Joe Burrow returning from his injury. They are the division favorites at plus 140 over the Ravens right now, and their win total for the moment is 10.5, and people are, guess what, Jake, betting the over. Overs for everyone, apparently.
Are we going to do that again today? I actually don't get this one. I don't understand why the Ravens aren't like the prohibitive favorite to win this division. I know it's a very tough division, and whether or not Deshaun Watson, when we talk about the Browns, that team is good this year. We're talking about the Bengals. Every team won 9 games last year, and I know that's an argument to say take some unders here. And I'm not saying to take the over on the Bengals. I think that's a fair number. I'd probably stay away from it because it wouldn't shock me either way. But how are the Ravens won 13 games and we're this close? I should actually put my hand up if I say that. This close from being a Super Bowl team, and how are they not the division favorites? I don't understand this.
I assume it's because the Bengals were fine last year, although Burrow basically blew out his calf in the preseason, tried to come back and play, and then got injured for the rest of the year, and they were able to manage with Jake Browning anyway. That if you return a guy who people expect to be an MVP candidate, that all of a sudden you're awesome again.
Sure, but are you telling me that Joe Burrow's good for 5 games difference? I mean, I'm not going to argue if you kind of like say no, but it's not. The reason I say that is because everything we talk about from Callahan leaving for Tennessee is because he was able to make Browning not miss much of a beat, as we talked about in fantasy last year when he stepped in for Burrow. So if I'm not saying that, look, I'll take Joe Burrow any day of the week. I think he's in the conversation potentially be a top 5 quarterback in the NFL. But for what happened on the field with the Bengals, it wasn't that much of a drop. It's not like they went from scoring 30 points a game to 5. So, I just don't get this. I understand where you're trying to come from, not you, but like the public. But I just think this is ludicrous. As you can tell already, I'm betting the Ravens to win a division all day long.
Man, you're going to get a pretty decent number on it. Better than plus 140, because that's what the Bengals are. Again, they are the favorites. Right now, Joe Burrow in season-long fantasy leagues is being drafted as quarterback 7, pick number 60. That's in the same range. He's sort of like this mid-range. He's going like well after this cluster of Lamar, Stroud, and Anthony Richardson, but before Kyler, Dak, Jordan Love, and that little mini tier. He's kind of on an island of his own. Do you like Burrow in fantasy?
I don't dislike him, to answer your question with not the word that you use.
Yeah.
It's just I don't have him anywhere because he's in that tier, and I'm looking at him, and every time I see him on the board, I'm like, but what's the difference between the whole C.J. Stroud argument where he has to do it all through the air? Like, I'd rather take somebody with a little bit more rushing, actually a lot more rushing upside. I really think that Burrow versus Dak versus Stroud, those 3, I think just they're all in the same conversation. So I'm going to take the cheapest one. I know Burrow's fun and exciting, and now he looks like Eminem. But if you're going to make him the most expensive of the 3, I'll take one of the other 2.
Well, looking at the projections, I essentially have he and Dak as the same amount of passing touchdowns, but with more passing attempts going to Joe Burrow at the moment. I think I'm going to up that a little bit for Dak Prescott just because I think that the Cowboys throw a ton this season. And I guess it kind of goes back to like, what are the Bengals going to do in their backfield? Because Zach Moss, I guess, is technically their starter at the moment. Chase Brown was getting a lot of love early on. Chris Evans is still around. Travion Williams will probably get a few touches. But is this Zach Moss's backfield? And if that's the case, is he wildly underrated in fantasy drafts?
So no and no, because I don't think it's his backfield. I don't think it's going to be a full-blown, he's the workhorse stepping in for Joe Mixon. He gets Joe Mixon's work. Look, however you feel about Zach Moss, if you're on the team like I am, where I think he's an above-average player, then cool. If you think he's been great in every opportunity, that's why it means he's a great running back, still cool, whatever. Let's just take those two aside and the fact that he gets hurt more often than James Conner at this point. Like, I don't think the Bengals are going to go out there and be like, yeah, let's give him 20 touches a game and then watch Zach Moss get hurt like he always gets hurt. So I think this is at least a split. I think it might be a little bit like the Steelers, 55-45, even a 50-50, very close just for the running backs. And in that case, I'm taking Chase Brown. I'm also taking Chase Brown later because supreme value where he's going, especially if Zach Moss gets hurt again. And the frustrating thing about Zach Moss, it's not like, hey, he tweaked his ankle, he'll be back in 2 games. It's usually Zach Moss gone for 6 to 8 weeks, and then he comes back, done for the season. Like, that's why I'm not drafting Zach Moss. And I think why I say no, he's not underrated, because I think the public sees that too. I think that's why he's going as an RB3, is because people know it's likely a split. And even if he is the 60% lead, he's probably going to get hurt at some point.
Zach Moss going at pick number 77, running back number 26. Chase Brown, pick number 119, running back number 38. If Zach Moss gets hurt, do we think that this is Chase Brown's backfield in terms of a workhorse, or does he just become the 65% guy and then Williams ends up, or Chris Evans, or whoever it is, ends up becoming the 35-40% guy?
This comes down to what I think is behind Chase Brown, and we've seen Chris Evans, and Chris Evans is a fine, hey, maybe he was a sleeper. Maybe he could do more in the NFL. Same, Travion Williams actually back in college for a brief time there. Looked like he could be a stud in the NFL, and he hasn't done anything since he got to the NFL. Injury is a little part of his. So I actually do think if Chase Brown, that's why I'm in on Chase Brown so much, because I do think if Zach Moss gets hurt, it's going to be a bell cow-ish situation because the options behind him are not that appealing. Now, we could be recording this now, talking about it now. In 3 weeks, Samaje Perine in the market, and all of a sudden he's the backup, and now he's contending with Chase Brown. Or Javonte Williams gets cut, or one of the other teams. Like, there could be a backup on another team that ends up not making the roster that throws a wrench into the plan. But if you told me this was the roster opening day, I actually do think Chase Brown could be a bell cow if Moss got hurt.
Looking at the receivers, obviously Jamar Chase is going inside the top 5 at receiver. That's probably where he's going to end up landing. Like, if you want to take Jamar Chase, take Jamar Chase. Like, no one's going to tell you that's a bad pick. What about T. Higgins, though? He's back.
Love it.
There is no Tyler Boyd this time around. The third receiver on the Bengals is going to be some sort of competition between, I don't know, Jermaine Burton, the Crocodile Anna, Trenton Irwin, and then Yeshmesh. That guy's name that I can't pronounce, who just randomly caught touchdowns towards the end of the season from Jake
Andre
Browning.
Iosivas?
Yeah, Yeshmesh.
Yeah. Yeah, Iosivas, yeah.
Who do you think it's going to be?
As the third or the T. Higgins question? I answer both.
Well, let's just go to third. Let's go to third first.
Third?
Yeah, because in my projections, I have Burton as the third, but it might not be.
I actually do think it's Burton. I think if Burton didn't have his off-field issue, he would have went a little bit higher. I actually think Burton's probably, talent-wise, I like Burton. I like Burton's game. So I think that his sliding had something to do with what people were talking about during draft day. I think he should be the third wide receiver. The problem that I could see folding into this is that Burton is more like T. Higgins and Jamar Chase than some other options on this roster. So do they like what they have with Irwin or Iosivas, or they want somebody to be more like Tyler Boyd was? That's not necessarily Burton's game. So I think it kind of comes down to what they want to run. Talent-wise, take Burton, and I think he's a good flyer in case T. Higgins or Jamar Chase gets hurt. Like, if you told me one of those two got hurt, I would definitively take Burton. It's more of the construction as of today. To go back to Higgins, I mean, we're talking about somebody who was a fringe wide receiver 1 with Boyd in the mix just 2 years ago, and then top 20 just, well, I guess 3 years ago, 2 years ago, and then last year was kind of the downturn. Banged up well. as well. Burrow got hurt. Like there was a lot going wrong for this offense last year, as we talked about off the top, where I love Higgins. I mean, I would take Higgins before I took Devonta Smith, especially with no Tyler Boyd and now a potential rookie as your third option and kind of that cluster I was just talking about. I think Higgins is like a screaming value right now.
Well, Higgins right now is going as wide receiver number 26 off the board, pick number 57. That's in the range, like the wide receiver going directly ahead of him is Amari Cooper. Keenan Allen is going directly behind him. Malik Neighbors is going higher. Zay Flowers, George Pickens, all going higher. He's basically the lowest end of the high-end number 2 receiver because Kupp is going higher. Devonta Smith is going higher. Who else? Stefan Diggs is going higher than he is right now. So he's like 5th on that list of high-end number 2. It makes a lot of sense to me that he would just have a really good year.
Who would you rather take on your team? Jalen Waddle, Devonta Smith, or T. Higgins?
Probably Jalen Waddle.
Okay. And then Higgins or Smith?
Probably Smith. I like all 3 of those guys, but I'd probably take him over Cooper Kupp.
I can see that as well. And I think that's the biggest answer here is like whether you disagree where Higgins might be. And I like Smith too. I think Smith has the potential, what we were talking about 2 years ago. And when A.J. Brown's first season with those two together, I remember Chris Meany, good friend of ours, he was saying towards the end of the season, he's like, it wouldn't shock me the way that they're running things if Smith actually outproduces A.J. Brown. And it happened for a small stretch, but with what we've talked about before, Kellen Moore running more pre-snap motion, that helps Smith more than it does Brown. Saying all to say, at least Higgins should be in the conversation with these names. And right now he's not. He's, like you said, he's the lowest of the 2s, and he's pretty far behind them going down to 26, 27. I am at 20, 21.
Yeah, my projections have him at number 17 at wide receiver right now, but it also has Chase at number 6 and not quite as high. So he does take a little bit away from Chase in the scenario that I have played out with my numbers. But in terms of where he's being drafted to juxtapose him with the Ravens, Zay Flowers is going slightly ahead of him. Would you rather have Higgins or Flowers?
Higgins. That's an easy call for me.
Yeah, I think I'm exactly on the same page with you there.
I'm gonna have 0 Zay Flowers. I have Zay Flowers down at like 29, 30. I would take Christian Kirk before Zay Flowers.
So would I. Actually, I think that Christian Kirk is still like a really good value right now.
He's another one. Yeah, he's a really good value right now.
The problem is you don't have that like top, like if Zay Flowers actually hits his full potential, he's probably a top 10 guy. I don't think it's going to happen. But even if Christian Kirk has his best year, is he a top 10 receiver? Probably not.
No. Yeah, and that's a fair way to look at it.
Mike Gesicki? I'm out.
I'm on a flyer as my second tight end if I had to wait, and my first tight end ended up being, I don't know. Like, I'll go back to the one that I've referenced a couple times on the show now, what's charity? I can't think of the word. The charity league I'm in. I took Hawkinson. I think we already talked about it. It was like the 10th roundish or something like that. It is best ball. But if I take Hawkinson and gamble, I'm not going to be fine gambling on a tight end. I'm gambling here that Callahan was kind of the one more than you mentioned. Zach Taylor calls the shots, but Callahan being in the mix as maybe he really liked the 3 wide, and that comes from the system of running 3 wide receivers all the time and the tight end being irrelevant. We tried to play this game for so long. C.J. Uzomah, Irv Smith last year is going to finally come through. All these guys. I think Gesicki is a fine flyer to take because if he is the third option, if Burton doesn't work as a rookie, doesn't work in that fit that I was talking about, Isovis and Irwin and all the rest are guys. And finally, Gesicki, it's not like we haven't seen Gesicki do things in the NFL and be a valuable tight end in fantasy if he was the third. Now, I'm with you. I don't really think it's going to happen. But if it did, kind of playing these scenarios, like what if Gesicki was the third in target share among receiving, not including the backfield, just it was Chase, Higgins, and then Gesicki, he'd be in the top 12, 14 at worst conversation. And that's why I'm okay doing it on a situation like I talked about.
Let's move to the Ravens, the second favorites in the AFC North. They're plus 145, meaning to bet $100, you would win $145 if the Ravens win the division. Their win total is also 10.5, the same as the Bengals. However, they're juiced a little bit lower to the over. It's minus 120 to the over, even money to the under. So it's about split, a little bit of money on the over because I guess people just, again, only bet overs when it comes to season-long win totals. Lamar is back. Menken's back. Zach Orr is the new defensive coordinator because Michael McDonald now in Seattle. But the big news here is Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry in this backfield. It seems like some people are all in on Derrick Henry, and then there's others who are essentially saying that he's washed, this isn't going to turn out well. I am in the camp that he might score like 20 touchdowns.
And I'm 100% with you. And I know Chris Meany is too. We've been talking about this on the show nonstop. I don't get why people aren't in for Derrick Henry. Like, workload, sure. He's not Zeke. Let's be honest. He's not a running back we've ever seen. The guy is a freak of nature. Running backs like him don't exist because they're usually playing linebacker or defensive end. Like, that does not happen. So I'm not worried about workload for him. If we want to talk another 2 seasons of 300 touches, okay, fine. Now at that point, let's have a conversation. But still, right now, it's the same conversation we've had I know you and I have had for the past 2 or 3 years. And I keep saying it's like, if he gets hurt, it's going to be a freak injury, not because he's worn out, not because of that kind of situation. Is maybe takes a shot at the knees or something like that. If you tell me Gus Edwards on his carry total can get over 10 touchdowns and well over 10 touchdowns, you're telling me Derrick Henry can't do the same? I think, isn't his prop at like 10.5 or 9.5 or something? Like, smash the over on the rushing touchdowns for Derrick Henry. The guy's rushing touchdown since he took over as starter. You remember Deion Lewis and DeMarco Murray when he was splitting early in his career. Since Derrick Henry's been the full-time starter in the NFL, his low is 10 rushing touchdowns, and that came in 8 games. Every other season, it's been 12 plus. I'm with you. As you can't tell, I am 100% all in. I don't know why I said one like that. 100% all in on Derrick Henry.
Right now, 10.5 at underdog is the season-long prop. Yeah, I like the higher on that as well. Like, I have him projected at 10 total touchdowns. The Ravens' history would tell us, and they've used so many different people, whether it be Gus Edwards or, hell, they've just brought in Justice Hill for no reason inside the red zone. They'll give it to Jean-Luc Picard sometimes near the end. And then you still have to deal with Lamar running it in, although he very rarely calls his own number near the goal line. You go get Derrick Henry so you can turn around, hand the ball to him on the 3-yard line, and you give it to him 3 times in a row. Like, that's going to be the game plan for the Ravens when they get in close.
And you know who is among the top leaders in rushing inside the 5-yard line? Gus Edwards. And you know how 13 rushing touchdowns. I actually have Derrick Henry rushing for 14.4. Just rushing touchdowns, 14.4.
So in the scope of where these guys are going, and I'll have a show out either before this or after this, probably after this, doing the AFC East, but it's with Leone, and we also talk about some of the values between best ball and how that's different than your season-long fantasy drafts. And we see that a lot of the running backs are getting propped up a little bit in season-long versus best ball, which makes a lot of sense because you're not doing a ton of stacking in your season-long league or as aggressively as you would be on underdog during the best ball. But to take a look at it right now, Derrick Henry is going 22nd overall in season long. That's behind Kyren Williams. That's behind Devin Achane. Behind ETN. I guess I could see the case for Kyren Williams just based on the workload, the all the goal line work. He's a 3-down back. He's going to catch passes. I understand that one. I'd probably still go with Derrick Henry, but I understand it. Achane, listen, it's not for me, but I get why people are doing it. That if it just... he has the potential to be the number 1 running back if they just hand the keys over to him. I don't think that's going to happen, but that would be why you would take him over Derrick Henry. What is going on to take ETN over Derrick Henry here?
I have no idea, especially because we joked about OTA news and the fact that OTAs last year is, ETN's going to see a lower workload. And then it actually went up 0.3 percentage points, so just not really relative to anything, but the fact that his workload didn't change and ETN was still ETN, which is just fine. But he's a bottom 10, like on the bottom end of it, top 10 running back, fringe RB1. I'm with you. What is the case? Is it because everybody's just like, Tank Bigsby's not a thing? Well, he wasn't a thing last year. Nobody's been a thing with Travis Etienne for the past 2 years, and he's still a bottom end RB1. That one is absurd to me. I have Derrick Henry 6th. I have 5 running backs in front of him. I'll take him in front of Williams, Gibbs. I like you when you brought up Kyren Williams. I understand that argument as well, but let's just compare the two. The workloads should be the same. So really you're saying the offset of the passing game offsets the rushing touchdown upside. I would still give it to Henry, not that Kyren Williams doesn't have his own. But like, do they offset, or maybe Kyren's a little bit better? I think the injury risk between the two is worlds higher with Kyren Williams because of his size. And I'm wondering if the quorum pick is just, does it really McVay bell cow Kyren Williams like it has been? Or do they peel off a little bit? And what if Kyren Williams is only 16 touches a game? Then it's Derrick Henry all day long.
And it's a really nice compliment, too, with where he's going. Even if you have to reach for him a little bit, and that's what you want to do, taking a look just at average draft position of how this works out. You miss on McCaffrey because you don't have the first pick. But let's say you have the fourth pick. You get Jamar Chase, or you get Tyreek Hill, or you get Justin Jefferson, whoever it is. And then you can pair him with Derrick Henry as your running back one. And then you still have a very early pick in the third round to turn around and take Isaiah Pacheco if you really wanted to, or just grab another stud receiver in that spot. That's a fantastic start to your draft.
It really is. I did a mock with Chris Harris, and I started with Tyreek Hill from the third pick, and I came back with Derrick Henry and then T. Higgins and Josh Jacobs. I would take that team all day long. Or it was Josh Jacobs and then T. Higgins. I went Henry Jacobs at the 2-3 turn-ish. But to start with Tyreek Hill and still get those two running backs and then come back with T. Higgins as my number two, like that, I think I'm setting up something that's very specific for people watching. The 3, 4, 5 pick is probably the only spots you can do this from. But I would take that every single time.
Justice Hill will operate as the primary backup to start the season. But then you do have Keaton Mitchell, who I thought looked awesome last year in very small doses, but I have no idea when he's going to come back. He's currently still on the PUP list. Could he be ready for week 1? I would doubt it. But when would you envision him coming back?
I think he'd be ready to do a full workload of what his workload would be by October. But I think this is kind of the same game we've played for the longest time with Derrick Henry of the Titans. The other person's irrelevant, and unless Derrick Henry gets hurt. Like, could get a few touches a game. You'd be like, man, I can't believe I didn't start Keaton Mitchell this week with his 3 receptions for 60 yards and his touchdown. Like, you can't say that coming. Like, you can't. Like, it doesn't. And then the one that they drafted, Rasheen Lee. Like, if not Mitchell, if not Justice Hill, like, could he be in the mix? Again, I don't really care. I think this is more of a conversation, unfortunately, of just we're going to have this as a big talk if Derrick Henry gets hurt on a waiver show versus trying to stash any of them.
I would stash Mitchell just because I think that he is good, that if given the opportunity, he could really break out in a big way if he was healthy. I agree. I don't know if he's like my preferred guy to stash on the bench of all bench stashes, but if I missed out on some of the higher end guys, he is someone that I would consider keeping around.
I think you have to be slightly low. I'm just trying to think on the top of my head, like once you get into the bench range, the few drafts that I've done mocks for, because everybody wants to do mocks right this time of year. And I'm just trying to think, and like the backups that definitively went was, of course, like the Corums and the Trey Bensons and stuff like that.
Yeah, Trey Benson. I mean, do you consider Chuba Hubbard the starter or Jonathan Brooks the starter?
I think Chuba Hubbard's the starter to start the season. I think Brooks could be much like Saquon Barkley's season, or even the worst case for Brooks is that Cam Akers season where Cam Akers did almost nothing until the end of November, and that was an RB1. And I'm not trying to put the Cam Akers stink on Jonathan Brooks, but I'm calling that the worst case situation. So I do think Chuba Hubbard is a valuable pick because he'll bring back. Look, everybody knows you have no trade value with him. Like if you're drafting Chuba Hubbard, it's not with, I'm going to draft him and then trade him in 3 weeks. Like nobody's going to be that crazy. But you're at least going to get RB2, worst case RB3 value until Brooks is the guy, which I think could be at least October, if not later.
And Hubbard's currently going at pick number 140. He's essentially free, in this spot. So the other guys, as backups, Corum, Chase Brown, Jerome Ford, I guess Zach Charbonnet would be another one. I would throw Mitchell like in that tier of guy, knowing one of the things that I like about him and like about him as a handcuff. The problem is I don't necessarily know that he's going to be the guy if Henry gets hurt. I'm just kind of gambling that he would be the guy. And he's the one that I would think would have the most upside in this situation, is that I never have to play him. I know, like, it's not a decision I have to make, like, am I starting Keaton Mitchell this week? It's like, no. If you have Zach Charbonnet, I also think Charbonnet falls into that category, but there will be people who talk themselves into, like, is he a flex? Like, no, he's not. He's a guy that's on your bench unless Kenneth Walker gets hurt.
And I definitely understand your point. I'm just kind of thinking, again, what I was going through my mind is, like, of all the backups, because the one point you brought in there, like, now, I'm a Keaton Mitchell guy, and I'll give credit where credit's due. I'm a Keaton Mitchell guy because of Emory Hunt. Emory Hunt, before my draft, like, I always send Emory my pre-draft, my rookie ranking list, and I'm like, dude, tell me if I have some outliers, and he'll send me back a list. And he doesn't say good or bad. He just says, watch more on these players, and gives me, like, a list of 5 or 6. It was Keaton Mitchell that year, and I moved Keaton Mitchell up. Emory was by far the biggest on him. But all that being said is, like, now I'm going through, like, the teams in my mind, and I'm saying, if something were to happen, is he the clear lead? I don't think necessarily Mitchell is. I kind of feel like he might go from being irrelevant in the mix because it's Derrick Henry to an Antonio Gibson type role, which is valuable. I just don't know that the Ravens want him to be the lead option as much as the complementary option. And then you bring in that whole conversation you already had with they'll turn to Justice Hill. Ali will be active and they'll turn to him. Like, I just don't trust the usage where, like, you know, you brought up Ford, but I mean, heck, I don't even think he's that good. And we saw that last year. But if Joe Mixon goes down, you don't think Dameon Pierce is going to get another shot at being the guy?
He might. Or they'll just find some scrub to bring in and use that guy instead. They love doing that.
They're too busy hanging out the passenger side of their best friend ride.
So Mark Andrews is being drafted as the 4th tight end off the board. You can make a case for him at 3. You can make a case for him at 6. Like, if you want Mark Andrews, go get him. He's going at pick number 49. I've never really been a big Mark Andrews guy. And then we get into the wide receivers. We talked about Zay Flowers a little bit. I like Zay Flowers enough. It's just I think he's being slightly overdrafted right now.
Yes. So it can be both. They're not mutually exclusive. I like Zay Flowers. I actually thought this was a great fit for Zay Flowers and liked him a lot. Problem is, I mean, we heard this with Bateman too. And I'm not saying that Flowers isn't better than Bateman. But you have Bateman. You know Nelson Aguilar is going to be a problem for his 6 active games or whatever they might be. And then, I wish we knew, do the Ravens move a little bit more to 2 tight ends? We've talked about this across a lot of shows here about stop drafting 2 tight ends on the same team because it just doesn't happen. It hasn't happened since the Patriots. If you told me one scenario where the second one could be relevant, and I'm not saying a tight end 1, I'm just saying relevant if they ran a lot of 12, and it would have to be a lot. It could be Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews, and I'm only bringing that up to say there's a lot going on with these wide receivers, and there's a lot going on every single year with the Ravens wide receivers. The answer's always been Mark Andrews, and the reason we like wide receivers and Isaiah Likely at times is because it's been when Mark Andrews has been hurt. So if you told me Mark Andrews is hurt day 1, Zay Flowers would definitively. Like, look at Zay Flowers' numbers with and without Mark Andrews. They're not as stark as some other players on some teams, but it's a big bump, and deservedly so. Zay Flowers, top 15, top 20 minimum with no Mark Andrews. But with Mark Andrews, I think he's more of a fringe wide receiver too.
So Aguilar, Bateman, Deontay Hardy, who's coming over from Buffalo as well, and they drafted a guy named Devontae Walker. I just kind of hope he's good because I love this name, Devontae.
Out of UNC, he is, but I think he has potential. But I think he's more of a. We'll talk about him possibly next year, depending on what shakes out through this roster.
So it's Flowers or nothing from the receiving core. I guess you throw Andrews in there as well. It's those 2 guys and then nothing. Then you have the Lamar question. I have Lamar projected as the number 1 quarterback right now.
You almost made the tongue-in-cheek thing. Everybody wants the number 1 running back. I have it so narrowly close. Let me actually pull up my projections to tell you how close they are. I think Allen still checks in as number 1. It's Allen, Hurts, Lamar, but we're talking 387, 377, 367. So 10 points. So I probably have a bigger gap than you do, but I mean, it's 10 points, 10 points, 10 points.
So I have Lamar and Hurts almost back-to-back in terms of projected points. And then I have Mahomes and Allen like 10 points lower, but almost with the exact same amount of points. What I found interesting about this is Lamar is going as the 4th quarterback off the board at pick number 38. I think that's a good pick. Like that team that we just talked about. Pick. I mean, it sucks that you would have to have Derrick Henry on that team as well. Maybe you wouldn't take Derrick Henry in that circumstance. But if you can go elite wide receiver, mid to back end top 10 running back, another stud receiver, and then Lamar, now that's a start as well.
Yeah, I was actually going to take Lamar on the comeback in round 4, but he just narrowly missed me. And I don't even care that I have to pair him with Derrick Henry. I would have done that, and I would have passed on, it was T. Higgins at that point, and I would have just taken somebody like T. Higgins. T. Higgins actually might have even made the 5th round at that point. But I'm with you. I don't get Mahomes at 3, and it's not that I don't get Mahomes, the player, but Mahomes has to have those seasons where, and he's done them. It's just I don't think they need him to, and this team doesn't need him to, and we've seen them not need him to. Is he doesn't have to throw for 4,800 touchdowns and 4,800. I mean, 4,800 yards.
Put it this way: yeah. I will almost guarantee that if he throws 4,800 touchdowns this year, he will be quarterback 1. You probably want some Xavier Worthy in your life as well.
You probably just want the whole damn team. I don't even care. Who's the 17th wide receiver on the practice squad? Look, 4,800 yards and about 40 touchdowns. He just doesn't have to. It could happen, but there's the not zero rushing upside, but very little. Zero rushing touchdowns last year after 4 the year before and 2 years before that. He just averages out to about 2. 319 I have for the rushing, 1 rushing touchdown, but even with 4,800 yards, I still have him for 35, and all that checked in is still almost 20 points behind Lamar Jackson. It just takes a lot with the arm to get if Lamar Jackson is there. And maybe people are just scared. SiriusXM wanted us to do like quote blocks for players. And I put that in quote because it's supposed to be, you get one paragraph. So like put your thing out there and be a little bit hot takey with it. I just said, he's the humdrum pick at quarterback. And not like humdrum is like Mahomes isn't exciting. He's just, if you want to guarantee you get a QB1, and potentially top 5, you're going to basically fall in that 5 to 10 range and you don't have to worry about it. Take Patrick Mahomes. I'm going to compare Patrick Mahomes to something we've talked about on this show and wait rounds, plural, later and take Jordan Love, even Joe Burrow, Dak Prescott, who could put up very similar, if not the same points per game at 3, 4, 5 rounds cost difference.
I would guess that the Mahomes love is because it's a perceived massive upgrade at wide receiver, bringing in Hollywood Brown. Rice probably going to play now. We don't know what's going on with his suspension. And Xavier Worthy, Travis Kelce returning, Pacheco looking a little bit better in the passing game towards the end of the season. Like those are the reasons that it's happening. And he's the most popular player in the league. That does translate over, especially into season-long fantasy when you're doing home drafts with your friends that aren't necessarily diving into the minutia of everything. And it's not like they're going like wildly ahead. Like Allen's going at pick 20, Hurts at 30, Mahomes at 35, Lamar at 38. So those 3 guys are kind of all going in the same tier. I feel like there's a little bit, we've talked about this for probably the past 10 years now because he's been retired for a very long time. But Lamar's just kind of suffering from the Marvin Harrison effect that everyone has now had a chance to have Lamar on their team over the time, and everyone's always very satisfied with having Lamar. But you're like, well, what if I just wait and get Anthony Richardson instead? It's like, well, you might as well just get Lamar because he's going to be awesome. You don't know about these other guys.
Hey, that's a good way to look at it. It's like, yeah, we know what Lamar does. We've experienced it. And now I want something. This is the shiny new toy rookie syndrome. It's, yeah, look, okay, cool. I know what I'm trying to think, like Joe Mixon can do. But what if, like,
Joe Mixon's a bad example because Joe Mixon might not be good. Lamar's going to be good.
No.
Joe Mixon
Joe Mixon, he doesn't reek.
He
doesn't. One, he doesn't reek as a player, and 2, in his same team. See, look, no, you're falling into it. You've had Joe Mixon. You've seen Joe Mixon forever now.
I know that Joe Mixon is going to be running back 15. That's great. I'll try to take my shots elsewhere.
I think he's more like RB10.
No, not happening. I'd much rather have ETN.
I'll take Mixon. You want to do the dollar bet fund? As we always do.
I mean, we do $4,800 bet. That's your range right now, $4,800.
Make it American. It's even worse for you.
Hey, listen, I get paid in American, so it's an easy exchange back for me.
Anyway, my point for my Joe Mixon was going to be, imagine if Blake Corum takes over instead of Kyren Williams and how great he could be. Like, well, Blake Corum and Joe Mixon aren't that different.
Passion, drive, patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Supercharger, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. Everyone who tunes into the Pat Mayo Experience knows from time to time I like to talk to you about some health supplements that I end up taking, and I've been doing Timeline's MitoPure now for about a month. Feel great? And I think you can too. Take 2 soft gels a day for 2 months, and you can see significant improvements in your cellular energy, your muscle strength, and your endurance. That was the big thing. I've been golfing more this summer and lifting less. Yet when I go back to the gym for my once a week, like max lift, I am not really atrophying that much. I'm not losing a ton of muscle, which is absolutely fantastic news for me and my golf game, because if you work out too much, then you get too sore, you get too stiff, you need to retain that flexibility. I'm retaining my muscle mass at the same time, although I'm not working out as much. And it comes in 2 product designs to fit your needs. They're berry powder, which is great to mix into your breakfast, yogurt, or daily smoothie. That's how I've been doing it. I've been eating some strawberries, raspberries, blackberries with a little bit of yogurt, a little bit of protein powder, then boom, Timeline's Mito Pure right on top of that. Or they have soft gels for the days where you're just on the run and wanted something convenient to grab and go. So, Timeline is offering 10% off your first order of Mito Pure right now. So go to timeline.com/Mayo to get that 10% off. All right? The Browns. How do I phrase this? All right, I'll just start with their odds. They are 6-1 to win the North, and their over-under is 8.5. So they're expected to be good, just not in the class of Cincinnati or Baltimore, which we saw their defense at home at least a year ago. Kind of keeps them in every game. But is Deshaun Watson just bad?
It's possible. He has not looked like we sat here on every show. Like, I'm not saying you, I'm saying everybody in the fantasy world and even the NFL world sat here this time last year and said, probably just shaking off some rust. It kind of got thrown in late to the season. Let's see what happens in 2023. What happened in 2023? Looked exactly like the 2022 Deshaun Watson, who stunk. I mean, awful. There's no denying it. There's a chance. There's a chance that the layoff, and he's just not good anymore. Like the drawings. Like we always joke on this show. Like that, there's a problem. Happy, you're not any good. Deshaun Watson might be in that conversation. This is crazy because we're talking about Deshaun Watson, who finished top 5 multiple times before the whole situation, and I just have 0 shares of him. I don't understand the upside, even if he gets back to being 90%. Like, I think that old Deshaun Watson, top 5 Deshaun Watson, I think he's gone. I don't think he exists anymore. I think that Deshaun Watson, best case scenario, is low-end QB1. And at that point, I'm like, low-end QB1. I'll just take my flyers. I'll take a flyer on Will Levis over Deshaun Watson.
Now, the one positive I will give him, and I don't know if it was a product because of the arm injury. And listen, the guy, what did he tear? Was it his rotator cuff? He had like a labrum, something in his throwing arm,
He's
right?
done everything at this point.
No, but last year, what was the injury?
Oh, I thought it was labrum. I could be wrong.
So I am someone, I tore my labrum when I was 17. I remember trying to play through it as a catcher, and I couldn't come through the ball anymore. I almost had to go like this and gimp arm it out. And that's how it looked like he was throwing last year. So maybe if he doesn't have a torn labrum anymore, that he could actually throw the ball again. But he did run a ton last year, which was really nice.
That was the part of the appeal that Deshaun Watson was top 5. So I'm looking at it right now.
But
and I don't know.
Was he running because he couldn't throw the fucking ball?
That's part of it. So it was a rotator cuff injury, but then he also aggravated it. And so it's listed as 2 different things: a shoulder scapula fracture and a displaced fracture to the glenoid of his shoulder. So probably the scapula. So, but the rotator cuff, I'll give him a pass for that. I actually had rotator cuff surgery. So I'm with you on that, just early last year, last May. And it just, the pain from sleeping on it to not having that pain anymore is a big difference. So I could understand if I was trying to throw with that, but it didn't really limit the motion. It was more of does it bother me today or does it not? So I don't know, I say pass in the wrong way. I don't think the rotator cuff is a huge issue unless it was severe, every time you moved your arm, it hurt, because mine, and it was a full tear because the bicep tendon actually tore on it too. I don't know. I just don't want to say, basically, to make this very short, after a really long-winded speech here, I just don't know if I want to give him a pass just because he injured his shoulder.
It more or less looked like there was no zip on his ball. He could only complete short
passes. The second time.
Yeah, but...
Okay. He was not good before getting hurt the first time.
No, he wasn't. But... maybe getting your shoulder rebuilt and getting that back up to 100% will allow you to have a bit more zip on the ball going forward. Because, you saw what these skill players could do with Flacco, and Flacco was just chucking it up.
2 skill players, though. Cooper and Njoku.
Yeah, but you bring in Jerry Jeudy now as well, and I still think that Jerry Judy's all right.
And we did this Elijah Moore part 2.
Well, just based on where he's going in drafts, like I don't want to say he's free, but he's going very late.
He's close to it. Jokes aside, like I will take a flyer on Jerry Jeudy. Although when he was sitting there on that Browns interview, that dude is a rail, super thin. Like actually, look, you could even see it in your picture. Thin arms and like I didn't realize how slim he was.
I mean, he can't be jacked like you, Jake. When you get all like gassed up like you are, you're gonna tear your bicep, like you just said.
That's what it is.
Can't tear your biceps if you have none.
Never been accused of being jacked. Maybe in shape, but not jacked. I will say, Jerry Jeudy, I'm fine with. Just to play out your scenario, Deshaun Watson isn't toast, and he throws for 4,000 yards and 25 touchdowns. It's kind of easy to do these days in the NFL. Then, yeah, Jerry Jeudy will have value. And I'm taking Jeudy over Elijah Moore. I think the biggest problem here is something you and I already talked about, is Njoku's irrelevant to me with Deshaun Watson under quarterback. Like, Deshaun Watson quarterback does not like David Njoku. David Njoku was great and did, 57 or 60%? It was like a ridiculous number with Joe Flacco for his production last year. No thanks without him.
I'm kind of with you. Like, I would have him at the very bottom of like the draftable tight end tier. Yeah.
So I have him actually, I think, yeah, he's my last tight end one. He is 12th, just in front of Hawkinson at 13.
And Hawkinson might be out for 10 games. So that's kind of like I would rather have, like, would you rather have Brock Bowers or would you rather have David Njoku at the beginning of the year? I think I'd rather have Njoku over Bowers.
No, so the way that you put it is, I could spin this, like, you made me think, you said at the beginning of the year, I think if Bowers hit the ground running, people will go nuts. And I was thinking of a trade value. Like if Brock Bowers was the number 2 on that team behind Adams through the first 3 weeks and came out with like 60 yards, 80 yards, 70 yards, and 2 touchdowns, people would be losing their mind because Brock Bowers is that good of a player. Terrible situation with the quarterbacks and also having to deal with Jacoby Myers is the number 2 wide receiver. Also, they just drafted last year the tight end, Mayer. So I think that's unlikely. But I think, like, let's say both had the equitable first 3 weeks, I think people would be going more nuts because of Bowers, the shiny new toy, than they would for Njoku just being Njoku from last year.
To take a look at the receivers, so Njoku's being drafted as tight end 11 right now, pick number 93, 2 spots ahead of Brock Bowers, but like 2 spots behind Jake Ferguson. Rather have Ferguson, rather have Ingram, rather have Kittle. So I think we're about where the market is on Njoku. But again, if Deshaun Watson can actually make the throws, and I think that was kind of hurting Njoku a lot last year as it pertained to Deshaun Watson being under center, is that a lot of the throws that Njoku was able to capitalize on and where his fantasy value came from with Joe Flacco weren't those like 8-yard outs. They were like 20-yard seam routes that Watson legitimately could not throw last year.
And again, fair point. I just don't want to bake in like, ooh, this is great.
Oh, sure. But I think the gamble in fantasy when it comes to any of these guys, be it Cooper, Jeudy, or Njoku, is that you have to make a decision on Deshaun Watson. Like, if you think he's going to be better and have a little bit more arm strength, then these guys are all kind of really good values. If not, like, they're going to be absolutely worthless.
Well, I think Cooper is regardless. I think Cooper has been underrated for years. He and Tyler Lockett every single year. Underrated. Tyler Lockett finally didn't capitalize last year. We've talked about that on that show. But Amari Cooper continues to do it. Amari Cooper actually, Meany threw out a stat to me when we were doing the podcast. It was an FTN stat. I'm sure it's multiple places. But it was, I forget the terminology because, there's stats for everything now. But it was something about created catches or something where it's an off-target throw that they caught. So it was deemed a pass that's likely uncatchable that they happened to haul in. And he blew away. He had over 20-something last year with Flacco and Watson combined and could fold right into your point about Watson and not being able to make those throws last year. But I think, again, goes more to the conversation of why do we continue to not draft Amari Cooper as a top 20-ish wide receiver, and why do people still not want Amari Cooper?
So Amari Cooper, well, we mentioned T. Higgins. He's being drafted 1 spot ahead of T. Higgins. I'd rather have T. Higgins than I'd have Amari Cooper.
It's basically a toss-up for me. I think it depend on the league.
I think I definitively want T. Higgins. Like, George Pickens is also he's going 1 pick ahead of Cooper. I'd rather have Pickens.
See, I'd rather have Cooper than Pickens, and I love Pickens, but obviously not enough.
It doesn't sound like you love Pickens very much. But like Malik Neighbors is going ahead of all of these guys. Like, I get you want the fancy new toy, and maybe he's going to be awesome, but I'd just rather have like these guys instead.
I agree.
Okay. Nick Chubb. I don't know what to do with this guy. I think I'm just going to draft him everywhere and hope it works out.
It's not going to, because I've been doing the same. So you're screwed. Like, it comes down to the conversation. This is the example I keep bringing up, is Saquon Barkley. That year he came back, and he came back to start the season. And those reports were, hey, Saquon Barkley is not going to be 100% to start the season. Give him some time. And they did. They like 11 carries, 13, 14, 15 touches max. And then we got to the end of September, in that final game, he started to really look good. And then the next game, I mean, he looked like Saquon Barkley. It's like, wow, Saquon Barkley is back. And then the next week he rolls his ankle and he's basically toast for the rest of the season because he rolled up on the Cowboys. But I bring that up as the example of, even if we never saw Barkley for all of September, and then he came back in October and was that Barkley for the rest of the year, we'd be like, no problem waiting. I'll probably draft him in the 5th round. It's the Le'Veon Bell argument you brought up way back in the day of like, I don't care that he starts the season suspended. I can find somebody to replace him and then move on from there. So I'm saying Nick Chubb, yeah, where's he going right now? I have him because
he's running back 33, pick number 88. So for context of the other running backs going around him at the moment, Jalen Warren is going 4 picks ahead of him. Tony Pollard is going 7 picks ahead of him. Devin Singletary is going 2 picks after him. Austin Eckler is going 3 picks after him. Javonte Williams, Brian Robinson. I don't like any of those guys anyway. And if you draft Chubb at this position in the 8th round, yeah, you might get the sticker shock of like week 1, you're sitting there being like, oh man, I have Nick Chubb, I gotta play him. If you just want to preach a little patience, you're not drafting him to be an impact player on your team. What you said is exactly right. If he can just be an impact, if he can be like 90% Nick Chubb by October 7th, you are laughing.
Yep. And that's why I have Nick Chubb at RB25. I think right after those RB2s, he and Jonathan Brooks are back-to-back, and I'll take Nick Chubb over Jonathan Brooks because I know Nick Chubb. And I expect Jonathan Brooks, but I know Nick Chubb. So I'm taking him in front of all those names you mentioned. I love Gus Edwards' situation. Still take him over Gus Edwards. And Zach Moss, who we talked about on this show, and the list goes on because, again, I have him at 25, which means I'm getting him in a lot of places, but I'm not – let's be clear. I want to emphasize this point that kind of gets glossed over at times, that you and I talk about for years now, is just because we're saying this, like, we'll take Nick Chubb over all these guys, doesn't mean you need to take Nick Chubb in the 4th and 5th round. Like, you can still watch the ADP. You can still take him. I got him last night, I think the 7th. Let me pull up the picture real quick because, again, I got Nick Chubb, and I always get Nick Chubb. I get Nick Chubb everywhere. At 8th round. Like, just there's no reason not to at that point.
And that's the whole point about drafting Nick Chubb. It's not reaching on Nick Chubb. It's just you're there in the 8th round. Like, what else is going on? Hey, this guy could be a top 10 running back if he's just all of a sudden healthy. Now, there are reports. Browns GM Andrew Berry, said that Nick Chubb still has, quote, a little ways to go in his rehab. But the team has been pleased with his progress. I did just see a video of him squatting, 800 pounds or something.
And he was on the field, on the practice field, running around. There was actually a report a few days ago that was like, oh, looks explosive. I'm like, okay, which is it? This is why, look, we'll appreciate the beat reporters, love the beat reporters, but let's remember, like, different people are going to see different things and report different things. So we kind of need multiple people saying the same thing before we put too much weight into it. And remember, they're also supposed to be positive about their own team. So you got to always take these with a little bit of grain of salt. Like, look for the actual trends across all of the beat reporters.
Jerome Ford isn't going until pick number 113 or so. Like,
all day long.
If you didn't like Nick Chubb, or hell, draft them both and see what happens, maybe, that you kind of hedge against, like, you kind of play the don't pass line with Nick Chubb and be like, hey, I'll just take Ford because Chubb's going to be terrible. And now I have a running back 2 in the 12th round.
Or hell, that's the biggest part about it. You have an RB2. We just saw Jerome Ford do it. What if Nick Chubb comes back, aggravation, not 100%, plays through something, like what? Saquon Barkley rolls up his ankle. Finally, took all the way till October. Rolls up his ankle, is done for the year. And worst case scenario than that, Barkley. But you get my point. Is there's still a chance that Nick Chubb, even if he's ready 100% for Week 1, Jerome Ford is one of the better backups. Like, he should be going in the conversation with Blake Corum. And then Jerome Ford has done it. Blake Corum has not.
I mean, he is being drafted there. 118 for Jerome Ford, Blake Corum 112.
Oh, I would expect the Corum to be a little bit higher than that. So, okay, there you go. Where's Benson?
Benson is 102, so he's higher than all those guys. He's just ahead of Tajay Spears.
I would still take Ford. So that point being, should be at least in that conversation, if not the first one of those conversations.
The Pittsburgh Steelers. 8.5 is their win total, and this is actually the one where people are juicing it to the under. So minus 160 to bet the under 8.5, plus 135. So you bet 100 on the over, and you win $135 from that $100 if they go over 8.5. They should be in this relative territory. Doesn't matter how good or bad they are; they're just gonna be here because that's what happens with the Steelers. They have Arthur Smith now as their offensive coordinator. I think that's actually a really big upgrade.
I think the biggest upgrade has nothing to do with Arthur Smith. It has to do with I don't care what you think about Russell Wilson last year. It wasn't as bad as people want to make it out to be. It still wasn't great, but it is definitively worlds better than Kenny Pickett. This is one of the biggest quarterback upgrades this offseason for any team. So Arthur Smith being an upgrade, sure. I think that they tried too many things. Like they almost seemed like a team that was like, hey, let's try this and see if it works. Didn't work. Let's try this, see if it works. Didn't work. Why? Well, mostly because your quarterback was Kenny Pickett. But I think Arthur Smith can definitively help. I think it could also be a problem in fantasy. Like both things can happen, specifically for the running backs.
Do you think it's going to be Russell Wilson? Because I do. Because, I mean, there's already reports like Justin Fields taking snaps with the one. I think for fantasy, it's fun if Justin Fields is the starter. I think if the Steelers are serious about winning, they play Russell Wilson.
I completely agree with you. Knowing Mike Tomlin and the fact that he does not know how to have a losing season, this would be one of the ones where I actually, of all these jokes about betting the overs, this was one that I feel like I might actually bet it. This team won 9 games last year, right? 9 or 10, with that awful quarterback situation. This team isn't that different. And you bring in Russell Wilson, this coaching staff, I think is that the Steelers are saying, we're on the cusp of going one or two directions. We're still a playoff team, but if this team starts off 1-5, 2-6, 2-7, then it's like blow this to hell up because they do have some aging players and some contracts that are pretty hefty, but towards the end now, and some young players where I could see them saying, you know what, it started off that bad. Let's talk about the finishing schedule. Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Philly, Baltimore, Kansas City, Cincinnati. That is, I don't care on paper or not. That is, I don't know what the NFL was doing to them. The NFL says, screw you, Pittsburgh Steelers. Good luck of getting Mike Tomlin a winning season. And I know a lot of it's the players, they're the teams they can't avoid. But to stack that from November 17th to the end of the year with no bye in there, that is like, you're just burying this team. So I can see my point being is if they're kind of out of it, then that's when you start the Justin Fields experiment. And hey, if he looks good against that stretch of teams, maybe he is the answer next year, and Russell Wilson was just a one-year experiment.
Well, it costs them nothing to start Russell Wilson either. He's on like the league minimum because Denver and I think Seattle are still paying him at this point. So What does this do to everyone else on the team? Because Pickens is the one that we really brought up as without Deontay Johnson around now in Carolina. He's the presumed quarterback 1 in this spot. But we just watched Arthur Smith run the ball 8,000 times a game. So it seems like everyone's now buying into that. Wide receiver 27, pick number 54. I mean, it's not bad.
I'm good with it mostly because I think this is a target hog potential situation. Like my comparison for George Pickens would be Michael Pittman from the last 2 years. It's not the best passing offense. It's not terrible, but 130, 140 targets, potential. I actually have him for 129, just under 130. I think he could get into the potential 140 conversation. And that kind of volume for George Pickens, even with inconsistent quarterback play coming from Russell Wilson, even if you told me Kenny Pickett was the quarterback again, 140 targets, I think you're talking about a solid top 20 wide receiver. I like Pickens. We made the joke that I don't love him as much as it sounds like. But it really comes down to who's the 2 after him. And I think it might be Freiermuth, which is why I think Freiermuth is a nice gamble at tight end because I like Roman Wilson more than most people after the draft, because like I wasn't a huge Roman Wilson guy going into the draft talent-wise, but Mike Tomlin in the Senior Bowl practice put him up against Quinion Mitchell, who was considered the 1 or 2 at worst at corner, because Roman Wilson was doing so good in senior practice that they're like, wow, I need to see what I see here. And then he drafts him. So that tells me a lot. Now, Roman Wilson's also banged up already. And then also talking about there's been some inconsistencies with him in camp. So now it's Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin. Mini Calvin Austin is like Wan'Dale Robinson. There's just nobody as a real answer to the number 2. So the answer might be Freiermuth, but what I go back to is the real answer is that all those targets are heading George Pickens' way.
That you can almost construct a case, much like that. Remember the Mike Evans case that I made that one year when I had him at like wide receiver number 3 or 4, and he was being drafted in the 3rd round, and like he was the only guy left, and Jameis was just going to chuck. We're not in a situation where Russell Wilson is just going to chuck, but Russell Wilson still throws a very good deep ball, and he still dumps it off a ton. That I think that Pickens, you're right, could be in this situation where he just ends up with like 140 targets. And so just inevitably, through volume, he's going to be really good.
And that's where I'm thinking of it. I mean, that's, like I said, Michael Pittman. And Michael Pittman's been top 20, almost pushing top 15 with those targets.
Pat Freiermuth is being drafted as tight end 15, number 124. Like, do you like him more than Njoku?
Because of the cost, yes.
Yeah. It's interesting. He's going behind your boy, Cole Kmet.
Freiermuth all day long. Even if the cost was a round early, 2 rounds early, I think Cole Kmet's going to be nothing, and Freiermuth has the potential to be. Freiermuth has a 700-yard season, and he has a 7-touchdown season his rookie year. He just hasn't put them together yet. And 700 change and 7 touchdowns, you put those 2 together, well, guess what? You're like tight end 10, tight end 9. Actually, last year, I should have remembered this because I joked with Meany about it. 700 yards and 7 touchdowns for a tight end would have made you tight end 7 last year. I should remember it because a bunch of 7s.
Let's see. Pat Freiermuth, what do I have? I have him projected for 478. His over-under on Underdog right now for the season is 500.5. I would almost like gut lean over on that one, but it's probably going to end up being a stay away because my projection is below it. And then, you miss a game or 2 and then you're absolutely screwed. So that's always the thing with these season-long totals, that there's always value on the under with all of them because injury can just go boom and your season's over and you automatically win your under as long as they end up playing a game. The backfield. I like Warren more than I like Harris. Harris is being drafted over Warren. Harris might end up with more touches and carries than Warren does anyway. I just think that Warren's a better player, a more impactful fantasy player based on upside.
Agree. We saw it last year, whether you chose metrics or watching the games. I love to do both, 50-50. I'm not one side or the other is more important. I think you can't do one without the other. But you watched last year, Warren looked better, looked more explosive. You looked at the metrics. Warren was better, was more explosive. Like, it just comes down to Warren might not be in that situation where the team thinks that if you gave him 20 touches, you still get the same Warren. It might be like, hey, this is what he can do with this kind of workload, with being spelled, with having breathers on the sideline. My biggest issue is I don't want any of them. If I'm going to take a flyer, it would probably be Warren. And I say any of them because Cordero Patterson's in the mix. Cordero Patterson was signed, and I know people are talking about, it's because of the return game changes. Sure. Where did Cordell Patterson just come from? Who's he coming with? Arthur Smith. You're telling me Arthur Smith isn't going to use all 3 of them and piss us the living hell off every single week? This is why I want none of them, because here's my issue with this, Pat, is let's even play a scenario where Jaylen Warren is the clear lead. Like, he's getting 55%. Najee Harris gets 35%, and then Cordell Patterson gets the other. It's still not going to be enough on a week-to-week basis where I can say, I'm going to start Warren. I know he's going to give me RB2 value every single week. Same thing for Najee Harris, every single week. They're going to be the Deshaun Jacksons of running backs as RB3s, which I don't want RB3s with that kind of inconsistency.
I'm a bit more bullish on Warren than you are. And I'm surprised that Najee's being drafted over him right now. Harris is going at pick number 66. Warren is going at pick number 84. That's the one spot ahead of Nick Chubb. Now, I like Nick Chubb better than both these guys, but I do think that the consistency with Warren will be there week to week because I do think that he'll end up being the primary pass catching back out of the backfield. Like, that's what he's very good at versus Najee Harris, who sometimes sucks up a ton of receptions, but he's like leadfoot Najee. He just stands there and doesn't do anything. Just immediately gets tackled, where Warren is an actual receiver and running routes out of the backfield, which can just have you some spike games, but it also keeps his consistent floor there. He's kind of like the good J.D. McKissick, where he's just going to get a bunch of catches, but he'll actually break a few and get carries along the way. If he could ever just like needle himself into some goal line work, I think he'd be a top 20 guy this year. I guess my question for you is Russell Wilson now a dump-off artist, or was that just a product of Sean Payton's system?
I think it was a mix of both. I think it's partly aging and, getting to the point where he sees the value in some of those throws and his ability at this point, but some of it being Sean Payton. So I think that you might get a few more throws. Like his deep ball's not gone, but it was never great and amazing to begin with. There was that connection with Tyler Lockett, but a lot of those were like 20 yards over the middle of the field when Tyler Lockett knew how to break open with him. So I don't think it's toast. I don't think it's a complete shift over. I think it's a little bit of both. But to go back to this backfield, even if he is a dump off, and I mean, looking at this number, this feels like a high number. I have 105 targets going to the backfield, but I have 45 Cordero, 35 Warren, 25 Harris. I just think it's going to be a monster headache. And maybe I'm just nuts on thinking that Cordell Patterson's even going to be used in the backfield, but I go to Arthur Smith. I go to what we just dealt with last year. I go to everybody saying, why is Cordell Patterson in the game? Why is Tyler Algier in the game? Why is Jabroni Jones, that other dude, I can't even think of his name, in the game, and Bijan Robinson isn't? Like, I think Cordell Patterson is going to annoy the living hell out of us.
I have Warren at 54 targets, so I think that's the big differentiator between us. And
that is the big
I have him
difference.
around 42, 43 catches. And if that's the case, like that's how he is a top 20 guy, even without a bunch of touchdowns.
And I will agree. So play the scenario where Cordell Patterson's a non-factor, and you're right in that. That's where I am with you. If I do want anybody, it is Warren. I'm still shocked. As much as everybody in the fantasy community sat here and talked about how bad Najee Harris looked last year, and he's still going in front of Warren, I'm with you. I do not understand that one.
All right. That is the AFC North. If you want the rest of the division previews, Mayo Media Network on YouTube, or hit the description. All the direct links are down there. You want the audio version, Pat Mayo Experience Audio Podcast, wherever you download your podcast, and code Mayo at Underdog Fantasy. But as we were going along, I just cropped up a quick two, just ones to pay attention to. Derrick Henry higher than 10.5 rushing touchdowns, and T. Higgins higher than 875 yards.
Oh my God. Give me both.
Yeah, I like the over on both of those.
I have T. Higgins for 1,150 yards. Actually, slightly even above that.
I have Higgins for 1127. Like
there you go.
It's a 300-yard discrepancy.
Smash.
Yeah. So I really like those two. You play those two together, $100 will pay you $270 if you want to throw those together. A good use of your deposit bonus of up to $250, I think.
I always love doing that. The one that was from Nando brought him in. The one that was on Jeopardy that won a whole lot. He was like the stat guy.
Jeopardy James?
I can't. Nah, wait, James. Yeah, James Holhauser or whatever it is. Yeah. Nando brought him in. And he's like, the best thing. He actually wrote an article on that. The best thing to do with your deposit bonus is to like put it on a big bet that you think it is, and if it doesn't hit, do it again because of odds. He broke down the whole odds thing of like how that works, just because I don't know. It was a good read. It's the let's make a deal situation where like if they tell you you can change and you always change because now your odds are 50-50 instead of 33. Similar to that.
Yeah, and like you're playing with house money. It's money that you have to use anyway. You can't just You can't get the deposit bonus then withdraw it. You have to use it in order to play it through. So I'm completely with you. I'd put it on something that can actually make you a ton of money in doing it. But those would be two legs of a giant underdog ticket that I would think about because I really like those two. The Higgins one actually might be. I'm going to write that one down. Higgins. I'll try to make
favorite.
I'll try to make up a super one for the entire season. I did it last year and it hit because I was in on the Rams. Everyone besides Cooper Kupp. We had like Puka overs, Stafford overs, Kyron Williams overs. It was great. But that's where we're at right now. RunTheSims.com, completely free with an email. Code Mayo if you want the simulations and the DFS and gambling product. But if not, you just want it for season long, completely free to use. Just runthesims.com, put in an email, and you can customize everything as you go. Check out Jake at The Athletic, at AllenKid on X, and you can follow me at The PME. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you next time.
Mayo Experience! Experience!